say, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll come to them towards the end. For those of you that don't know me, I am Simon Chaplin. I am sat here today as MD of GreenStones. I know there's a few people on the call that know me through the Accountants Mastermind, but today this is a seminar or a webinar or an online meeting on behalf of GreenStones, which is the accountancy practice. And I am speaking today to a very good friend, Daniel Barnett, who is also an exceptional, if not the best, employment law barrister in London. So would you like to just give yourself a brief introduction, Daniel, as to who you are and how you've found yourself in this position this morning?
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name's Daniel Barnett. I'm a practicing barrister at Outer Temple Chambers and I do employment law, which means I defend businesses against claims that are brought by their employees and ex-employees on a wide range of topics: discrimination, TUPE, unfair dismissal, restrictive covenants, that sort of thing. For a number of years, I've been involved in online education as well. So I host a number of seminars on my own account and help other people like Simon with theirs. And I'm also the Legal Hour presenter on LBC Radio. So if you're an LBC fan, you'll often hear me on there also. Simon and I have known each other for many, many years. We're in a mastermind group together. Everyone should be in a mastermind group because they're amazing. Yesterday, Simon and I and the rest of the group were speaking about the impact of coronavirus on our businesses. And I said I'm doing a number of these seminars and charging quite outrageous sums of money for them, which is why my business is actually doing well. And Simon said, well, will you do me a favor? Will you come and speak to GreenStones clients and contacts? And I said, yeah, sure. So this is an act of friendship. Simon's not paying me a penny.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel. I'm pleased I've got that on video as well. So without further ado, let's fire away at the questions. These are all going to be around team. So quickly, briefly, Daniel, how do you furlough somebody? If you've got a team member that you need to furlough, how do you do it?
Well, the starting point, Simon, I will answer the question, but there's one thing I want to say first, if that's okay, is that we don't know any of the detail of the furlough scheme yet. All we have are the headline points that the Chancellor announced on Friday. And if you go and look at the text of the speech and the guidance for employers and employees, there's about 4 paragraphs of text there. Now, we're going to get pages of legislation on it when it comes out, but it's complicated. The government needs time to put it together. And most importantly, they need time to set up the online systems that will allow employers to reclaim the money through an online portal. At the moment, it's just not set up at all. The government's never needed to do anything like this. So I think this isn't going to go live for a good few weeks, if not months, but the government has said it will backdate any payments to the 1st of March. So to answer your question, Simon, how do you put someone on furlough? We don't know for definite, but it's looking like all that's going to be needed are one of 2 things. Number 1 is an existing clause in somebody's employment contract that says we can lay you off, we can make you stay at home without work. And if you have that clause in there already, you can just rely on it, invoke it, you can tell them to stay at home, and you can get 80% of their salary from the government. Option number 2 is you have to agree it with them. So you say to someone, look, these are your options, because we're struggling, we've had to close our doors. Option number 1, we're going to have to dismiss you on grounds of redundancy. Maybe we'll pay your redundancy pay. Maybe we haven't got the cash and you'll have to sue us or sue the government national fund. Good luck getting that money a year later. Option number 2 is we send you home and you continue working from home, but we don't know whether we're going to be able to pay you. Maybe we'll dial your hours back to 30% and pay you 30% of the money. Option number 3, go home, don't do any work, and you'll get paid 80% of your salary, just sign here. Now, any employee in their right mind is going to agree to that. It's only the most militant employees who might object.
Yeah, well, somebody that's perhaps got 40 years worth of service and a big redundancy package potentially.
Well, you're right, Simon, but of course, furlough doesn't stop them getting their statutory redundancy when they're made redundant.
Oh, when they come back, yeah, so you might as well take it and delay taking the redundancy until whatever point. Brilliant, thank you. So next question, specific question. Can I furlough somebody part-time?
No. The essence of furlough leave is that you're sitting at home doing nothing. So if you've put someone on short-time work, or you've dialed back their hours and they're only doing 2 days a week or something of that nature, they are not going to be eligible for furlough. And there's a reason for that. The government's trying to stop people coming into work. So it wants them staying at home the entire time.
Okay, so what about if I furlough somebody and then they go and get a job at the local Tesco's or something like that? Is that my responsibility to check that? Is that
Well, if they've already got a job, so they do one job in the morning and one job in the afternoon, that's fine. But if they do a full-time job for you and you put them on furlough and then they go and get another job, no one knows the answer yet. That's going to have to be dealt with in the legislation. It will almost certainly disentitle them from getting furlough, but that's speculation because we haven't seen the legislation yet. More importantly, it's almost certainly gross misconduct, because your contracts of employment will say you can't work for someone else when you're meant to be working for us. And so the employer can dismiss them. Of course, what the government doesn't know, the government doesn't know. And what the employer doesn't know, the employer doesn't know. So if the employee does that and nobody knows about it, they can be sitting pretty, earning 2 incomes, or at least 1.8 incomes, and they're laughing all the way to the bank, which is exactly what's not meant to be happening in these circumstances.
brilliant? Okay, and then I think at the beginning of this conversation, I forgot to mention I did a webinar this morning and I had some technical difficulties, and it's just starting to freeze again. So if anything happens to me, then Mark Swindell's on the course on the call this morning, and he will take over. So that's why you can see Mark at the top. Another question that we've got, Daniel. If I furlough somebody and they want to help the business by volunteering and continue doing some work, is that allowed?
No.
Just simply full stop in the story.
No.
So how do I stop them? Is that if I furlough somebody and they want to help me, is that then gross misconduct? Can I?
Well, it's not gross misconduct, but it disentitles them from getting the furlough money. So you would be committing a criminal offence if you claimed the 80% from the government.
All right. So it would be on the responsibility of the employer to then not claim the furlough money because they're working. Okay.
Yes.
Brilliant.
And an area where this is going to cause problems, Simon, is in the charity sector. So, for example, if people work at a dog or a cat home and the volunteers want to continue helping the cats because someone's got to look after them, it puts the employer, the cat's home, in a very difficult position. But people are going to have to work their way through the practicalities.
Because it's really, so I'm just thinking from my perspective, really, I've got a team that have been furloughed and they log in one morning and they just look after the emails, for argument's sake. That's working. So they're then therefore not furloughed.
Yep. I have no idea whether the legislation is going to have a what lawyers call a de minimis, a tiny exception in there, but I'd be surprised. I think it's got to be 0.
Okay. Another question. What happens if work picks up? So can I furlough somebody, unfurlough somebody, and then furlough them again if it goes away?
Well, that's a really good question, because you've described it in a way that would make where the obvious answer would be yes, of course. But the government, and again, this is all subject to seeing the legislation because we haven't seen it yet, but I think the government's going to be cautious about allowing that for the simple reason that they probably don't want employers to be able to rotate furlough leave among staff. So imagine if you have 3 members of staff, 1 of whom is needed, 2 of whom aren't. Week 1, you give 2 furlough leave and an employee A comes in. Week 2, you have employee B in. Week 3, you have employee C in, and the other 2 get furlough leave. That kind of subverts the purpose of furlough leave, which is to make sure everyone's at home and not coming into work. So there's a chance the legislation will say, if you've been on furlough and come off it, you can't go back on again.
Okay, because that's another question. So for small business owners, they might only have 2 or 3, perhaps 5 team members, and say they pick team member A, and then team member A has to go into self-isolation and can't work for 14 days. Could they then unfurlough person B because person A can't work?
You'll certainly be able to unfurlough someone. But we just don't know whether you'll be able to re-furlough them.
Furlough them once they've. That seems. I understand why they're doing it, but that seems inherently unfair. I don't know.
Well, I'm speculating here. We don't know what the legislation is going to say. I can just see the government being super cautious about abuse of the furlough scheme and putting in protections that might have unintended consequences of the sort you're describing.
Okay. Next question. Pensions and auto enrollment. Do I still need to, if I'm furloughing somebody, do I still need to contribute to the auto enrollment pensions?
Yes, because, again, subject to seeing the legislation, because it might say you don't. But as a matter of principle, yes, because all furlough actually is is the government reimbursing 80% of salary costs. It's helping out with cash flow. It doesn't relieve the employer of the need to pay those costs in the first place. In the same way, if 80% of salary would put somebody below the national minimum wage, they still have to be paid the minimum wage. Just the employer will have to top up the 20%.
Oh, I didn't know that neither. So that's an interesting. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We've got a number of industries that we work. I'm thinking cleaning and hairdressing and things like that, where that could quite easily be a problem.
Simon, sounding like a typical lawyer and saying there are ifs and buts, we can't rule out that when the legislation comes out, they will make an exception for the minimum wage.
Yeah.
But as things stand, it will have to be paid.
Yeah. And from a business owner point of view, obviously we're working with the best information that we've got available. And from a tax perspective, we're in exactly the same boat as you are from an employment perspective as well. And we're just doing the best that we can do with the information that we've currently got. Notification, you said you have to get basically the team members' permission if it's not in the contract. And obviously we've got to notify the revenue when the portal goes live. Is there anybody else that needs notifying? Health and safety, insurance companies for people not being, is there anybody else, do you think?
No idea. With regard to insurance policies, I suppose you'd have to check the wording of your insurance policy. But of course, the essence of furlough is they're not working from home. So questions of being insured to work from home don't really arise.
Of course, yeah.
You said two things, insurance and something else. What was the other?
Health and safety.
Health and safety, right. So an employer's got an obligation to make sure that the employee has a reasonably safe place of work and system of work. Now, it might be that at home they have lots of hazardous chemicals, unshielded scythes and blades, and also and open flames. We don't know. I don't think the health and safety executive is going to be prosecuting anybody who tells their employees to work from home, unless their employees say there's a problem.
Yeah, because technically we should all be doing workstation assessments and all that sort of thing. Well, obviously, last night the place was closed and everybody went home. Nobody's had an opportunity. Everybody's on laptops and various other different bits.
Well, you should see where I'm working at the moment, Simon. I'm constantly tripping over my children and my dog.
And then the last question on this team section. I've got the money. Obviously, we've traded during March, and I've got the money to pay the March wages. So I'm going to furlough my team from the 1st of April, but I'm not going to have the money to pay. Even if I furlough them, I'm not going to have the money to pay the wages at the end of April. And it sounds like this portal is not going to be available until May. Can I lend the money to the team, or do I just have to say you'll get your 80% as soon as I get it from the company? How does that work?
Right, so there's a couple of different ways this can work. The government has said that people can borrow to pay the wage bill in the short term, but if you've got 100k going out your bank account every month in wages, you're not going to be able to borrow 100k at very short notice, particularly because the banks are just so busy dealing with business loans at the moment. So that's not going to be viable for a lot of employers. Option number 2 is to ask employers to agree to defer their salary and again say to them, these are the options. Option number 1 is we make you redundant and sue us for the redundancy payment because we don't have it. Option number 2 is work full time when it's not safe to do so. Option number 3 is go on furlough leave, take 80%, and you'll need to defer your April salary for a month. And yeah, it's their choice what they want to do. The final and least good option is to simply say to them, look, we're really sorry, we haven't got the cash flow to pay you, sue us. And by the time the case gets to an employment tribunal or small claims court, which will be a year down the line, because all courts have closed now, they'll have had the money 11 months before that anyway, so there won't be a case left. There's a tiny risk of a constructive dismissal claim, but frankly, if you've already offered them the option of a statutory redundancy payment and they've said no, why would they resign and not get a statutory redundancy payment?
Brilliant. So just in my terms with that then, so if I've not got the money, I need to get the team members or the employees' permission to delay it. That's the best way
to do it. Yes.
Brilliant. So there must be some standard furloughing letters and notifications floating around in the ether somewhere.
Well, not yet, except I've actually drafted one. Would you like me to send it to everybody on this call?
Yes, please. How much is it?
Millions, but for you and your contacts, it's free.
Well,
How would you like me to get it to you? Shall I
it,
share it now, or shall I email it to you and you can pass?
if you could email it to me, and then I'll email it out to everybody. Otherwise, there's a danger that some will get it and some won't get it because they won't be able to work the chat. So that would be fantastic, Daniel.
You will have it within 30 seconds of this call ending.
Brilliant. Thank you. You are an absolute star. I'm just conscious of the time. I want to move on to directors. In your opinion, so we've got lots of businesses where they've got one or two directors and a number of employees. Can a director be furloughed?
A director can be furloughed if they are on PAYE. And again, subject to the legislation saying otherwise, but a director is an employee. Executive directors, rather, are employees. They will only get 80%, and always subject to the 2,500 cap. They will 2,500 a month cap. They will only get 80% of their PAYE earnings. So if some of their earnings are drawn by way of dividend from a company that they wholly or partly own, they won't get 80% of that. Subject, Simon, to this scheme that we now know from the Chancellor's speech an hour ago is coming to give some sort of help for self-employed people. Now, that might cover directors who draw dividend income. We don't know yet.
Okay, so if because this is a hot topic within the accountancy community, if I furlough a director, my understanding of it is if you furlough somebody, they can't do any work whatsoever. But that director will be responsible for running payroll, furloughing the team, paying the team, paying other suppliers. So is that stuff work?
Yeah, no, that would be work and they can't do it. That would be part and parcel of their employment relationship with the organisation for which they get PAYE salary, and they wouldn't be allowed to do it. So where you have an executive director who's dealing with stuff on a day-to-day basis, they can't be furloughed and get 80% reimbursed from the government. But some businesses will have multiple directors, of course, some of whom are involved in the day-to-day stuff and some of whom are not, or at least need not be. An operations director in a restaurant chain might not be doing anything, whereas the human resources director might be.
Okay, so for most of the businesses that we work with, most of the customers of GreenStones, there'll be a sole director, perhaps two directors. So you might be able to furlough one, but there's always got to be one director there to sign and do all the rest. Yeah. So that one couldn't be furloughed.
Yeah. And by the way, Simon, through the magic of technology, you already have that furlough agreement in your inbox.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you. It's amazing. And then the last question, because this has come up a number of times, and I think as much as anything, it's customers understanding the difference between the two. Most directors that work for a limited company, they are an employee and an office holder. So they hold the office of director, and they're an employee. Is there a distinction between the two anymore, or is that something that went out with the?
There's still a technical distinction, but it used to be the case donkeys years ago that directors couldn't claim unfair dismissal and other employment rights because they were just office holders. It's now recognised that as well as office holders, they are employees most of the time, and the office holder bit of it doesn't really matter very much anymore.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we have 18 questions. I think I've answered lots of the general ones, but we've now got 18 questions that I just want to run down. And I think, again, you've answered some of these, but we'll see what comes up. So if anybody else has got any questions, there's your opportunity to put them in the Q&A section if you've not had your question answered, and I'll run down them. So are there any restrictions on employees working elsewhere whilst furloughed? The answer to that was yes. Can employers give their employees loans until the government have the portal set up? That was a yes. The
80%. Just to check the nomenclature, the language you're using there, Simon. What they're doing, of course, is paying salary. So it wouldn't be a loan. It's paying the salary in the normal way, and then that salary is reclaimed from the government once the portal is there.
All right. So it cannot be a loan in that scenario because the employer is paying the salary to then get the money back from the government.
Exactly.
So it's irrelevant. Okay, so all, and this is going to sound a little bit like me going into zombie land and a bit skeptical about it. So all of the liability for getting that 80% from the government is on the employer. So
Totally. The whole essence of furlough is that it's a funding scheme by the government where the government reimburses the employer for the employer's liability to pay salary. So the employee and employer agree that the employee will accept 80% of salary, and then the employer pays it because the employer is liable. The government's not liable, but the government will reimburse the employer.
So so say for example the portal's not ready at the end of April, we pay the April wages, and then in May they turn around and say, I'm ever so sorry, we got the maths wrong, we can't pay it. Then that liability will still rest with the employer.
It would do. I think that's unlikely.
Yeah, I think that's unlikely too. Yeah.
If for no other reason than Boris Johnson would know he'd never be re-elected, but you're right as a matter of principle, Simon.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Lisa's asked the 80% of the gross amount to process through the payroll. So, or is the amount including ERS and NI and pension? And is it? Do we know if it's taxable and nickable yet, or is that?
Okay, so the employer's guidance issued by the government is completely silent on this. The employee's guidance, and I don't know why it's only been put in there, says that the 2,500 will cover all employment costs, which suggests that it will include employers' national insurance and employers' pension contributions. I can't be any more precise than that. It suggests it includes those. Any salary payment is still taxable because it's still salary being paid, just 80% of it rather than 100%, and it is taxable in the normal way. I am assuming, again, we don't have the detail yet, I am assuming that the employer will pay the net salary up to the 2,500 cap, and the employer will be able to recover the gross, or at least not then have to pay the difference to the government with its next return.
Okay.
But again, we don't know. The devil's in the detail.
So the cap, just to repeat that, so the cap is 80% of the gross plus the ERS plus the
no. All we know, assuming that the employee just gets paid 80% of net.
Yep.
But that's an assumption itself, because it could be 80% of gross netted down, which would have a slightly different net to 80% of the net. We don't know which one it's going to be yet. Am I making sense? Because I'm conscious I'm talking to accountants. Yeah. So the employee gets 80% of whatever it is, and that 80% is subject to a cap of 2,500. That 2,500, the cap though, includes any employer's national insurance contributions and employer's pension contributions.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Do we have any further guidance on directors being covered? We've done that one. Does the £2,500 include the cost of employers' NI? We've just done that one. Can they be furloughed for 2 weeks each for a month of? Can they be furloughed for 2 weeks each month for 3 months? So if no, you've said no to that.
I haven't said no. I've said I don't think so.
Don't think so.
You know you're dealing with a lawyer when you get that sort of comeback.
Yes, Daniel, and please keep picking me up on that one. Can I furlough somebody who is due to start on the 1st of April? There's an interesting one. So.
Yep.
Okay, brilliant.
Yep, that's simple.
And what about somebody that's going on to maternity leave? Can I force somebody that's going on to maternity leave to be furloughed?
Oh, that's a good one. We don't know. We just don't know. Because their contract of employment has been suspended, and they have a statutory right to pay, certain pay, whether it's 90% of salary or SMP at, what is it, £90 a week, give or take?
Yeah, something like that.
We don't know how that's going to work. But of course, maybe for 6 weeks they get 90% rather than 80%. But for the rest of it, their SMP would be less than 80% of salary anyway.
Yep. Okay.
So it doesn't matter.
No. Brilliant. Thank you. Can I furlough somebody for 3 months and then re-employ them? The answer to that was, we believe so. I'm going to start sounding like
Well, we're just talking about taking them off furlough
yeah,
rather than re-employing them. I
yeah.
know what you mean.
Okay.
Yes, you can take them off furlough at any time. The only issue is whether you'll be allowed to
Yeah.
put them back
Back
on
on again.
furlough.
And we don't know that at the moment.
We don't know that at the moment.
I'm gonna start getting good at this, Daniel. It's like, so I take it furloughing isn't run through the payroll, only records kept of payments made. I don't imagine that you will know the answer to that.
I'm not quite sure what Eloise is asking there, so sorry, I can't help Eloise.
No, but from our perspective, I believe it's got to be run through the payroll software in order to be able to calculate the tax and national insurance, because that's going to be done in the normal way. However, my understanding of it is at the moment the payroll software can't even cope with the SSP from day one, let alone the provisions of furloughing. And I've got a funny idea that I don't think most of the software people will want to change this tax year's. So I've got a funny inkling it's not going to kick in until the 6th of April. So how we then work with the March situation, I do not know. It'd be interesting to find out where that goes. What about 0 hours contracts? Do they get 80% of zero?
You know, every single one of these sessions I've done, Simon, someone's asked me about 0 hour contracts, and my answer is, please don't ask me that. So with 0 hour workers, bear in mind, most 0 hour workers are just that. They're workers, not employees. And
Okay.
this only applies to employees. But you will get some who are employees. And the answer to that is not a clue. Because the one argument is you can dial back their hours to zero anyway, so they get 80% of nothing. The other argument is they should get 80% of their average earnings over the last 12 or 52 weeks. And we don't know which one the government's going to opt for in the legislation.
Okay, so you're confident that will be covered off in the legislation, are you?
No, of course I'm not.
That's going to be, yes, a late
But
night.
also, so there's another issue here, Simon, of course, which is that these problems, whilst they might be difficult for employers on the ground to deal with, and for accountants to help employers know what to do, it's not an immediate problem, because the worst case scenario is someone's been put down, someone's not being paid 80% of average earnings because they're 0 hour workers, and they end up resigning or not resigning and just claiming arrears of wages. The problems kick down into the long grass, because a court hearing or tribunal hearing isn't going to be for 12, 18, 24 months, by which time either the business has gone bust anyway, so it's academic, or the business has recovered, and the amounts of money at stake probably aren't going to be that big.
Yeah, so so there's and I understand there's a lot of urgency, there's a lot of uncertainty, which creates the panic. And there's a desire to have information and act on it now. Whereas if you think about what you've just said logically, you can take action around that now and then not have to worry about it for 2 or 3 months, and
Exactly.
probably never at all. Because if
Exactly.
you furlough somebody and the money comes through, then they've got no claim anyway. Okay, brilliant, thank you. So there's no such thing as reduced hours under this deal. We don't believe so.
Correct. You can still agree reduced hours with somebody. It's just that the government won't pay you 80% of it.
If they're furloughed, do they accrue holiday?
Yes.
Seems fraught with difficulty. Would it be better for them to be supporting? That's just a bog standard thing.
But the answer is no, Simon, because of course the government wants people staying at home.
Staying at home, yeah. The government quote they contribute up to 80%. How is the percentage decided?
Because it's got a cap of £2,500 a month, which is broadly equivalent to £3,200 gross, which is broadly equivalent to £35,000 a year. So anybody earning £50,000 a year won't be getting 80%. They'll be getting a much lower percentage.
They'll just be getting the cap. But as it stands at the moment, if I repeat what you said earlier, and I'm going to have to watch this back, that we don't know what's included in that cap as yet.
Correct.
Okay. How do we run payrolls for furloughed workers at the moment? I don't know whether you'll know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that.
No, and I don't know whether I know I don't know whether anybody knows the answer to that, Penny. As far as I'm aware, none of the software works to be able to do it. But we will see. Must the staff sign something agreeing to furloughing?
Well, it's first of all, you've got two routes to furlough LOEs. There might already be something in the contract that allows them to be sent home. If there's not, they have to agree to be sent home on 80% of pay. But under current employment law, they wouldn't need to sign anything. Agreeing it verbally would be good enough. Query whether that's prudent, because you might want to prove later that they agreed it if they turn around and say, why didn't you pay me 100%? And also there's a possibility the legislation, when it's published, will say you've got to sign something. We don't know.
Excellent, thank you. If the government pay 80%, are employers expected to pay the 20%, or is 80% acceptable?
The government has said that employers are not expected to pay the 20%, but can choose to do so if they want.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, Jason, I think the employee would rather have 80% and a job rather than 100% there and no job. So how would anybody know if somebody is working when they're furloughed?
Well, there are three ways of finding out. Number one is you hire a chain-smoking detective in a long, dirty Mac and send them round to stand with a 1980s Betamax video camera outside their house. Number two is you ask them and see if they tell you the truth. And number three is you accept you're never going to know.
No, I probably don't want to know is the ultimate. Not that so somebody doing work won't get paid, but those not doing the work will get paid.
I think what Jan means is someone's doing right. So I think what Jan is saying is that it's seemingly unfair that somebody can be sitting at home doing sweet FA for 80% of salary, whereas someone else can be coming into work. The person previously sitting next to them is coming into work, working full time and only getting 20% more.
Yeah.
I think that's the point Jan's making.
Yeah.
And yes, that does seem very unfair, Jan. I don't really have more of an answer.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We will have to pay the employer's NI on the 80%.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Can somebody cut their maternity short and then go into furlough? That's a really interesting.
Absolutely, as they can't cut it to within 2 weeks of giving birth, but after that 2-week period, yes, they can.
And do they have to give notice on that, Daniel? Is there a 4-week notice to come back?
There's an 8-week notice period, but the employee and employer can agree to waive that between them.
Okay, so if you're coming toward, so basically, if you're now on, you're now over 39 weeks, I think it is the first 9 months, so you're on unpaid maternity leave, you could say, right, I want to come back and get 80% of your salary reimbursed by the government.
Yeah, of course, the government, when it publishes the legislation, might say you can't
legislate against that, but as it stands, okay, brilliant, thank you. Where employees are on unpaid leave to look after children, can we furlough them, considering they have already told us they're not available for work? No.
I'm pretty much certain no, because the effective cause of their absence is they're looking after their children, not furlough leave. I'm drawing an analogy in my mind. Sorry, I had to pause a moment to think of that. Right. An analogy in my mind with, do you remember, Simon, rules about layoff and short time? Are you familiar with those? Okay, so there's some old 1970s law which is resurrecting itself again. Back in the 70s, particularly in the industrial age, the union-dominated factories used to agree layoff clauses with the unions, which are that the factory owners, the business owners, could send workers home, lay them off, pay them nothing when the factory was quiet, and in certain circumstances that was okay. Now, there was a lot of case law back in the 70s about if you're off sick and then your employer lays off the workforce, do you still get your sick pay? Or do you get your layoff pay, which was £35? Well, it's now £39. Sorry, £29 a day. It was a lot less then. Which one do you get? And the case law back then said that if someone's already off sick, their sickness is the effective cause of being away, and so they don't get layoff pay. And it must be the same here, Eleanor. If someone's already on unpaid leave to look after children, that's the effective cause of them being away, and so they wouldn't get furloughed.
Okay, brilliant. The question is where is that recorded, I would imagine, but we deal with that when we get there. Can the non-paid company secretary take over the pay and duties of the director if a single director is furloughed? So that's an interesting.
I'd have thought so.
So if it's the same person, so Simon, so me, I am company secretary and director of a company. Can I resign or furlough myself as director, but remain as company secretary and sign the checks and whatnot?
Interesting. I don't know. I wouldn't presume to give an answer to that. I think that will need a court decision.
Yeah, I love the creativity and imagination of people when they're trying to. It's like, never thought of that one. It's fantastic. Thank you, thank you, Vivian. Are they going ahead with the minimum wage increase from next month?
As far as I know, yes, they've announced postponement of extension of IR35, but nothing's been said about minimum wage.
Okay. Do we run the March payroll at 80% then, if they were furloughed from the 1st of March?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no better answer than that at the moment. If a sole director has no work for the next 3 months, i.e. plumber, locum, can we claim 80%, or are they just classed as self-employed and can claim any potential grants that the government may release in the coming days? Well, that question, if I summarize that in the conversation that we're having within the accounting community, it goes back to the minimum wage, high dividend, so low salary, high dividend. And on an article that I read, that where you'd talked to LBC, Daniel, you seem to suggest that dividends might be, or people that receive low salary, high dividends might be treated within the self-employed regime. Was that? Okay?
No, I don't think they will. If I said that on LBC, I've changed my mind since, because I'm constantly yo-yoing over this. Because the way we've just seen the draft amendment to the coronavirus bill, it was published this morning. Can I share my screen, Simon?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to share my screen. Goodness knows what just before I do, I'm going to close down all my other windows, because we really don't want people seeing pictures of my family and so on.
I'm just conscious of your time as well, Daniel, because it's 20 to 1. So
right, so I'm just going, give me a second to find the link. Give me 1 second. This won't take long. I'm nearly there. It's not been updated. Let me just find it in one other place. This is a website I run, and it was meant to be updated first thing this morning, but it's not been updated. Let's just go to here. No, it's not there either. I do have it in my inbox, but I'm afraid, Simon, I don't want to expose my inbox to public view, because it's got confidential legal stuff in there. So I'll just summarize what it says. Sorry about that.
Sure.
The coronavirus bill, an amendment to the coronavirus bill came out this morning, which is essentially saying that for self-employed people, if this gets passed, they'll be entitled to a guaranteed minimum income to replace lost self-employment of, I think it's £3,000 odd, I forget the figure. But from the way it's phrased, it seems to apply very much to self-employed income, not director income.
Yeah.
But again, it's all draft legislation, and we don't know what's going to end up happening.
Yeah, I see that last night, and it for mine, it's based on the last 3 years worth of accounts.
That's right.
Yeah. And then
so all those people putting lots of expenses through their accounts are going to be regretting it now.
All of a sudden, they want the numbers for the bank rather than the numbers for the tax office, which will be interesting conversations. Quick question from Vivian. If you're paying the extra 20%, does it need to be shown separately on the pay slip, or is it just lumped together as one lump sum?
Just one sum, because again, unless the online portal requires something different, but the employer has the liability to pay the money. It's the employer's salary that's being paid. The fact the employer can then reclaim 80% from HMRC doesn't affect what's on the pay slip.
Okay. Can you just expand then, Daniel, on the point about somebody starting on the 1st of April qualifying? Everybody thinks, or this person thought, that they had to be on the payroll at the 29th of February.
Okay, interesting point, anonymous attendee. The government has said that this is all going to be backdated to the 1st of March, which is where I assume you got the date 29th of February from. I've understood that to mean that if you were laid off yet being paid money during March, you'll get 80%. You'll be able to reclaim 80% from the government. There is nothing the government has said to say you have to have been in employment on a certain date in order to qualify. But I have said, and anonymous attendee, you may have heard me say this on LBC or somewhere else, I've said that I think when the legislation comes through, there's going to be a start date on it, i.e. you have to have been employed before this start date, in order to prevent you, Simon, for example, suddenly deciding to employ your wife, your brother, your sister, and your children on massive salaries once this scheme was announced in order to get 80% of it. So I think they will have a start date as an anti-fraud measure, but they haven't announced that yet. And they certainly haven't announced it'll be 29th of Feb.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. New employees starting on the 18th of April, can they be furloughed straight away?
Yes.
Yes, as far as we're concerned. We have a number of staff who started at the beginning of March. Can they be furloughed?
Same
yes,
point.
it's the same question. Same question.
So I'm interested to know, Mark, anonymous employee, etc. Where are you hearing about this thing of 29th of Feb from? Because if you've heard it from some official source, I haven't. So I'd quite like to know.
It could be. There is massive amount of misinformation going around at the moment with so for example, last night there was a post on social media about the self-employed stuff, and then it was shared that it failed, so it had gone to be voted on at the Commons, and then it had failed, and then this morning from two separate sources I was told it was redone and it was going to the House of Lords, and from somebody else that I know that it had failed, and they're both people in the legal profession as opposed to the accountancy profession. So there's a lot of stuff out there at the moment that and people, there's lots of shoulds and mights and coulds, which are obviously. What is someone on sick leave now after a knee operation and is due back in 3 weeks' time? Can we furlough them now on their return? Sorry, you can't furlough them now, but you can do on their return. Is that right? Because they're currently not sick because...
Probably subject to seeing the legislation.
Perfect. I could almost be a legal power planner if that's the... I'm finished with this. If somebody works variable hours each month, do we base it? So if somebody works variable hours, Daniel, how do you work the 80% on? That's
a great question, Vivian. I suspect, again, we haven't had the legislation yet, but I think the only way it can be done is by basing it on the concept of a week's pay, because that's a defined concept in the Employment Rights Act, and that's what's used for holiday pay. That's what's used for all sorts of other purposes, including notice pay when you have people with non-standard working hours. And a week's pay until the 6th of April coming is the average of the last 12 weeks' wages. From the 6th of April, it becomes the average of the last 52 weeks' wages.
Okay, thank you. Can you offer it to some employees and not others? The answer to that is yes.
But Simon, sorry, you've got to, obviously you cannot discriminate, so you can't offer it to men and not women.
Okay.
And there is an argument that's inevitably going to be run by employees that picking your mates to go on furlough to give them 80% and making the people you don't like work for an extra 20% will be a breach of the implied term of trust and confidence, leading to constructive dismissal.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. This is a question. It's a non-furlough question, remarkably enough. So, if you consider your team to be essential and therefore they've got to come into the office or come into the workplace and they catch corona, do you believe that you can get sued for that?
I'm going to hesitantly say no. I don't believe you can be sued for that. And the reason I'm being equivocal is because I'm not a personal injury lawyer.
Okay. So I know we started this conversation at 30 minutes. You gave me a barrier of 45 minutes at the top, and the questions are coming in faster than what we can answer.
Well, when we started the questions about 15 minutes ago, there were 25 questions. There are still 23.
Oh, we got two. We've managed to get two down. So
let's go to 1 o'clock.
Okay, we'll go to 1 o'clock then. So we'll go back to the top. If somebody is on a basic salary and commission, would the retention scheme be on the full income average over a period? So is the 80% on the salary or the salary plus the commission? And if it's on salary plus commission, is it over a period, sort of 5 months?
The government has said nothing to indicate that it is limited to basic salary.
Okay. Can you furlough all the employees, including shareholder directors, if they can still do some work? Well, they can't do any work is the simple answer to that.
Correct.
As key suppliers, if we have to cut our hours to 80% equivalent, is there any support?
Absolutely none, I'm afraid. This is an all or nothing situation. So if you've got employees excuse me, if you've got employees and you say, go home, don't do any work, the government will pay 80% of the salary. If you say to employees, we're cutting your hours back to 30% or 50% or 80%, you've still got to pay 30, 50, 80% of salary, but the government won't chip in a penny. For the government to chip in, they have to be totally at home.
Can an employer move an employee to another site, so from a retail shop to a supermarket? Can the employee to do that? And then
it will need a mobility clause in the contract. So the contract will have to say, we have the right to move you somewhere within a reasonable distance. If that's the case, then yes.
And then the subplot of that is, can and still insist on furlough. Well, the employee can't insist on furloughing.
I was just about to say, Simon, I'm going to challenge the premise of the question, but you can do it for me. Go on.
The day you stop learning, Daniel's the day you stop earning. So presumably government will be able to identify from payroll information that furloughed and take another job. So if they're getting, that's just Susan saying,
good point. Yeah.
That does give the revenue some credit that they'll be able to combine two systems together. But that is
You're right, because of course for the furlough you need to give your national insurance, or one assumes you'll need to put in national insurance details.
So I think that's correct, Susan. But whether that's a practical possibility, who knows? Could we increase directors' gross pay amount in April and then furlough one of them? So
well, that's a really good question, because we don't know what anti-fraud measures, because that is fraud essentially.
Yeah, that's.
We don't know what anti-fraud measures the government's going to put into the bill when it comes through. I just don't know is the answer to that.
Yeah, and that's also our take on it at Greenstone. So we've had a number of conversations with customers saying, can I reprocess the February payroll in order to change the salary that I had in February? Well, for me, that's just an absolute no-no. Morals and ethics without the legal implications of that. I was referring to non-working directors getting the 80%, but those doing the work are not covered, even if they can't afford it or are doing a small amount of work. Okay, Jan, thank you. That's not a question. If there's a question there, Jan, that I've not answered or we've not answered, then can you ask it again? If an employer only pays 80% now, how is the difference to be dealt with? What figure goes through the payroll as gross, the normal amount, or the 80% of the normal amount? So I think what Alan's asking there, if I pay 80% now, Daniel, and then in 3 months' time, the world is rosy, and I want to top up the 20% that I didn't pay, the 20% would go through when I decided to pay it in November, for argument's sake.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. James, is there any help available to agency workers? And are they eligible for furlough?
Okay, so James, just reading the second part of your question as well, they're employed on contracts for services. If someone's employed on a self-employed contract, then they will not be eligible for furlough. Simple. They may be eligible for other assistance the government's going to announce soon. But of course, many agency workers are actually employees of the agency. And if they're employees of the agency, let's say I'm an employment agency and I supply accountants to Simon, who pays me my fee as the agency, and I pay the accountancy workers. I, as the agency, can furlough those employees if Simon says to me, I don't want them anymore. I don't have the work. I don't want them anymore. I, as the employer, can furlough them and take 80% of salary, or reclaim 80% of salary from the government. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense, yeah, because it depends on who it is. Yeah. So Mark says someone switching employment. So there was with employer A up until the 31st of March, and then employer B from the 1st of April. Who does the claim?
Well, presumably employer A for the month of March and employer B for the month of April.
That was my gut reaction. We've run the March payroll. Yes, are all now furloughed. Can we claim this back next month, as and when, or has it come too late for us? So,
don't know.
No,
it'll depend on what lawyers call transitional provisions in the legislation when it comes through.
Okay. Sorry I joined late. We've covered whether directors can be classed as furlough. Yes, Craig, we have. And if you watch the video, because there's quite a bit on that. I work for a company limited by guarantee, not for profit, which is publicly owned, mainly by councils. Are we covered by the scheme?
Yes.
Councils. Okay, brilliant.
Sorry. We don't think councils are going to be covered by it. We don't know, but we don't think they are, because the government said it applies to businesses. But if it's a company limited by guarantee which supplies services to councils, I'm sorry, as you were reading it, I wasn't getting the question properly. It's publicly owned. I don't know, Chris. I'm sorry.
And what about schools and teachers, Daniel? So public school, private schools, they've obviously got teachers with no kids at the moment. Can
Yep.
teachers be furloughed by?
Yes.
Yeah, they can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We just think public sector employees won't come within the scheme, but we don't know for definite yet.
Okay. If an employee is pregnant, can they come to the company and put them on early maternity leave, or should they be on SSP or furloughed?
Company put sorry, I'm just rereading it.
That's right. Sorry.
Well, the company can't force anyone to go on early maternity leave. It's the employee's choice when they go on maternity leave, unless there are serious health and safety risks, which there might be. I'm sorry, Debbie, I don't quite get what question you're asking. Do you understand it, Simon?
No, I think from what Debbie's saying is if I was a team member, I would want to be furloughed for as long as possible and then go on SMP, because I then get 90%, and that 90% wouldn't be recoverable.
I see. Yeah. So with maternity leave, in order to get SMP, you have to give, I think it's notice 11 weeks before the birth. I'm never quite sure of these figures, to your employer. And you can say what date you want your maternity to start. You can put a date that's on the expected date of birth and be furloughed all the way up to that. If you give birth earlier than the expected date of birth, then your maternity leave automatically starts.
Okay, and then another question about if an employee has already been made redundant before the scheme was announced, are they entitled to the 80%?
Well, this is another interesting question about fraud and anti-avoidance. The normal position is their employment will come to an end, and at that point they are no longer entitled to, will or has come to an end, and at that point they're not entitled to furlough. As the law stands, there is nothing to stop an employer and an employee agreeing to resume or renew the employment contract. And if they do that, then the possibility of furlough arises. I suspect the government will say that's outside the scheme.
Okay, brilliant. And then I've got a comment from, it's not a question, somebody's in the chat box, they've shared where the 29th of February has come from, and apparently there's a prominent tax community that's sharing something around that. So after we've finished, Mark, if you can make sure you keep a note of that, then I'll have a butchers after we've finished. Oh, it's the ICAEW that have mentioned the 29th of February. So,
well, that's a credible source.
Yes. So we'll see. And somebody else has also said that they think he mentioned it in the speech on the 29th, and I've now got the link. It's amazing. Now we're getting down there. So if I do that, then we should have that later. If someone is furloughed partway through the month, I assume the salary would be split.
Right, I'm just looking at the guidance now, and what the guidance says is that it will continue for at least 3 months. I've clicked on that link, Simon.
Okay.
It will continue for at least 3 months and can include workers who were in employment on the 28th of February. So that doesn't say it only includes workers who were in employment on the 28th of February. It says it can. It's not very clear, is it?
No, it's not to me, because I don't know what that means. So to be totally truthful. So if they're employed on the 28th of February, it can include them in the scheme.
It's not clear whether it's a permissive can, i.e. they're allowed to, or whether it's a exclusionary
requirement,
can, i.e. they can only.
Okay. Yeah. I need a legal degree, I think, before we finish with this. If someone is furloughed, that one I've just answered. Sorry, we're getting down and we've got 9 left and 4 minutes, because I want to say thank you, obviously, to Daniel at the end. Tony, that's a big question. Trevor, if I furlough employees today, can the furloughed salary payment be backdated to the 1st of March?
No. I'm assuming you pay weekly or pro rata. No, that would be fraud.
Do I have to guarantee? Do you have to guarantee layman for the certain period of time after? So do you have to lay them off for a period of time? I think that is, Daniel. So
I think what Marcus is intending to say is, do you have to guarantee them work for a certain amount of time after the furlough? That would make more sense as a question.
Okay.
To which the answer is no.
No, they just come back and away you go.
Yeah.
So wife joins the PAY of my company for the year ended 28th of February. Can she be furloughed? Well, it's the simple answer to that is she can't join it unless she was there on the 28th of February. Whether or not she can join it now and then be furloughed, or without the ethics and morals and all the rest of it.
We'll have to wait and see what the legislation says against anti-fraud. And Andy, I know you'd never advise anything fraudulent. It's whether the government would think that sort of thing is fraudulent.
Yeah. If there are workers on contract for services, I don't quite know what that. Do you know? What
I think what James is saying is, can you get furlough if you're on a contract for service rather than a contract of employment?
Okay.
The answer is, well, I'll let you answer that one, Simon.
No, is it?
No.
Probably no.
Well, no, it's an unequivocal no.
Is it? Okay.
You're picking up a lawyer's bad habits as well as the good ones.
If a self-employed person has taken a part-time job, as they can no longer earn from being self-employed, will they still be able to benefit from any self-employed support working part-time while we don't know is the answer to that.
Yep.
Craig asked earlier, but can we furlough key workers if there is no work for them? Yes is the answer. Sorry, I've just pressed the wrong button. Susan, can employees that were made redundant as part of the coronavirus be re-employed and then furloughed?
Well, we've answered that one. That might run foul of anti-fraud measures.
Okay, and James has said yes. I need to pay my March wages tomorrow. Does that mean I cannot furlough people for March?
Well, you can't follow retrospectively unless they are already at home not doing any work.
Not working.
The key is not working. So if they've been working for 3 weeks of March and then you suddenly say, oh, I'd like to furlough and get March's wages paid by the government, that's a big no-no.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then the last question, if employees stay away from work and not covered under SSP or furloughed, are they entitled to any salary?
No.
So if they choose to stay at home, they're not entitled to anything at all.
If they choose to stay at home and they're not ill and they're not staying at home because of government advice to do so, issued by Public Health England, then they are not entitled to any money.
Brilliant, Daniel. That is all of the questions gone. We've
bang done on 1 o'clock.
Twice as much as what we should have done. Never experienced a conversation or an interview like that, Daniel. And yeah, it's fantastic. The processing and the thinking that you're going through as I'm delivering those questions off the cuff and answering is a fantastic skill, which thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any way, if anybody wants to find out any more about you and work with you or find out, I know you've got a podcast, is there any way that anybody can help you, LinkedIn recommendations or anything like that? Is there anything that we can do to show our thanks for the contribution that you've made today?
Well, it's really kind of you to ask. I do actually run a membership club for HR people and small employers, which is hrinnercircle.co.uk. So if any of your clients want HR help, that's a good place to start looking.
So small employers can join that as well?
It's overwhelmingly for actual HR professionals, and 95% of members are HR professionals. But there are some people with some sort of weird obsessional interest in HR who aren't HR people or weird obsessional lawyers like me, and they're very welcome to join.
Okay, brilliant. That's fantastic. Could you put that URL in the chat box, and then what I'll do is when we finish, we'll just mute and I'll leave it there for a little while. So if anybody wants to cut and paste it and click on it and far away. And then what I'll also do is I'll post Daniel's LinkedIn profile in there as well. So if you want to do a recommendation on LinkedIn or say thank you on LinkedIn and tag him, obviously the more people that find out about Daniel's work and the way he works and share the information, then that's better for the whole community. We're getting lots of thank yous, Daniel, as you can see. Everybody is welcome. It just leaves me to say thank you, Daniel. Fantastic. I shall be aggravating you, bending your arm, whatever it is, sending you flowers to see if I can convince you to come back as soon as the legislation has been issued. I know if I could beg you, probably would be.
I would be delighted, Simon.
It'd be fantastic. So
you have to let me have time to read it first, though.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll kick off at 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And then it's away we go. So just leave me to say thank you very much to everybody that's come along and listened. And if anybody's got any questions of us at Greenstones, then just obviously fire them across, and say a massive thank you to Daniel for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye, mate. Bye bye.